At 2:07 a.m., a Harvard professor laughed at the idea that an 8-year-old could touch his board. 5 minutes later, he wasn't laughing anymore. He was watching her rewrite his life's work. At exactly 2:07 a.m., in the cavernous silence of Harvard's Widener Library, the security lights flickered. A small figure darted between the ancient history shelves, not a student, not a scholar. Just an 8-year-old girl in worn secondhand shoes. In her hands, a battered flashlight, a tiny pencil, and a question no one had answered in 14 years. She thought no one saw her. But upstairs, behind a glass wall, a man had just frozen in place. Professor Nathan Cole, one of Harvard's most respected mathematicians, stood unmoving. His eyes were locked on the library chalkboard, because in faint, careful handwriting, an 8-year-old girl was rewriting his life's work. Her name was Sophie Alvarez. She was quiet, curious, invisible, the way only a child of the invisible can be. Her mother, Isabel, scrubbed Harvard's basement floors 5 nights a week. Sophie would wait there, alone, curled in a dusty corner with an old book and a half-eaten apple. But lately, she hadn't just waited. She had started watching. When the last footsteps faded and the grand halls fell silent, Sophie would slip out. She tiptoed across the cold marble floors, careful not to trip the motion sensors. And in the math wing, beneath towering glass boards left behind by minds far older than hers, she would stare at symbols, strange and beautiful. She didn't understand them, not yet. But she saw their shapes, their patterns, their rhythm, like music on paper. One night, unable to resist, Sophie had picked up a marker. She traced a symbol that looked like a butterfly. Its symmetry made her smile. The next night, she came back. She carried a tiny, lost-and-found notebook. Page after page, she copied what she saw, not to cheat, not to impress, just to understand. Sophie had no teacher, no classroom. Her public school had expelled her after too many absences. No one had asked why. No one had cared that her mother worked double shifts, and that Sophie stayed home to care for her infant cousin, because no one else could. Harvard was never meant to see her. But Harvard had become her secret school, and tonight, the board held something new, a long, winding equation, numbers, symbols, Greek letters Sophie couldn't name. But somehow, she understood. She balanced her flashlight on an empty mug, and she began to write. Upstairs, Professor Nathan Cole wasn't supposed to be there either. He had returned to retrieve his wallet, forgotten after a long night. His lecture on nonlinear constraint systems had flopped. His students had left confused. He blamed himself. The equation was beautiful, yes, but brutal. And he hadn't found a way to make it sing. As he walked past the glass balcony, he noticed a shadow below. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he leaned closer, his breath caught. A child. Writing. Not doodling. Not playing. Solving. She was adjusting the structure of the constraint, shifting a variable that even his graduate students had misunderstood. Nathan Cole stopped breathing. He simply watched. Below, unaware of her audience, Sophie worked with a quiet reverence. Her small hand moved carefully across the board. She paused, tapping her chin with the marker cap, squinting as if the board whispered to her in a language she almost understood. Then she looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened. The flashlight toppled, rolling off the table with a dull thud. Sophie stumbled back, clutching her notebook. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wasn't going to break anything. I just wanted to look. Nathan Cole descended the stairs slowly. Who are you? He asked, not unkindly. She hesitated. My mom, she cleans here. I wait for her sometimes. He nodded. His gaze shifted to the board. And this? Sophie bit her lip. It was already there. I thought maybe it could move here. She pointed to a term near the center. Because if that variable stays locked, the whole thing gets stuck. Like when a swing can't go higher because the chains are too tight. Nathan blinked. Where did you learn that? She looked down. Nowhere. I just try things. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to her shock, he walked to the board, picked up a second marker, and began writing beneath her notes. Sophie stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. After a few moments, he capped the marker. You were wrong, he said. Her face fell. But only because you didn't know. I changed the constraint yesterday during class. She looked up. You mean I was close? He smiled. You were too close, he said softly. A smile crept onto Sophie's face, the kind that felt like sunlight through a locked window. Nathan turned to her. Does anyone know you do this? She shook her head. Do you want to keep doing it? She blinked. You mean math? No, he said. I mean learning. Like this. With me. Quietly. After hours. Sophie looked unsure. I'm just a kid. I don't go to school anymore. Nathan knelt, meeting her eyes. Doesn't matter. If you're willing to come here, at this hour, I'll be here too. We won't tell anyone yet, but we'll learn. She didn't know what to say, so she nodded. And just like that, something shifted within the walls of Harvard, not loudly, not officially, but deeply. Because somewhere in a place built for the elite, an 8-year-old girl had been seen, not as a problem, but as a possibility. Later that night on the bus ride home, Sophie Alvarez glanced at her daughter. You okay, mija? Sophie nodded, but her mind was still back in the library, back on that board, back in that moment when someone didn't just tolerate her. He had seen her. When they reached their tiny apartment above the laundromat, Sophie didn't go to bed. She pulled out her notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote one word. Begin. The next night, at exactly 2:00 a.m., Sophie Alvarez slipped through the ancient doors of Harvard's math wing once more. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, a low hum like an old secret. She tiptoed past the deserted reference desks, her worn shoes making no sound against the marble. As she rounded the corner, heart racing, breath held, she stopped. Professor Nathan Cole was already there. He stood by the chalkboard, a quiet figure in a crisp sweater, 2 notebooks under one arm. On the table beside him sat 2 markers and 2 small cups. No coffee tonight, he said, smiling softly as she approached. Not for geniuses under 10. He handed her 1 cup, hot cocoa, and motioned for her to sit. That night, they didn't touch the sprawling equation from before. Instead, Nathan uncapped a marker and drew 3 simple shapes on the board. A triangle, a circle, a spiral. Show me what you see, he said. Sophie frowned thoughtfully. She wasn't used to being asked what she saw, only what was right or wrong, but she trusted the space between them. She stepped closer to the board, tapped the triangle first. This one feels like balance, she said slowly. Like it could stand still and strong. She pointed to the circle. This one is safe. It doesn't move. But it doesn't break either. And then to the spiral. Her voice softened. This one is still, but it wants to move, like it's reaching for something it can't see yet. Nathan leaned back, nodding. You think in pictures, he said. That's good. Math is full of pictures most people never see. He didn't treat her like a child. He didn't talk down. He didn't simplify. He asked. He listened. He challenged. And Sophie, hungry for understanding, responded like a match-meeting fire. From that night forward, the lessons became a ritual. Quiet. Sacred. Each evening, Sophie would pretend to sleep on the narrow cot in the janitor's room downstairs. She waited until the last cleaning cart rolled out. Then she would slip upstairs, notebook in hand, flashlight in her pocket, heart in her throat. And for an hour, sometimes 2, she would think again, dream again, learn again. Not for grades, not for a future she could name, just because it made her feel alive. Some nights, she struggled. One night in particular, she stared at a rotating matrix problem Nathan had left on the board. No matter how hard she tried, the symbols wouldn't fall into place. Her hands clenched the marker. Frustration burned hot behind her eyes. Finally, she sat down hard on the floor and let the tears spill over. Nathan didn't scold her. He didn't tell her to try harder. He slid the warm cup of cocoa her way. Try again tomorrow, he said gently. The next night, she did. And when the pieces clicked into place, both of them smiled. In a university where success was measured by publications and prestige, something revolutionary was happening in a forgotten wing of the library. A professor, an 8-year-old girl, a marker, a notebook, a chance, and in the hum of the fluorescent lights, a new kind of lesson began, one no textbook could teach. Officially, Sophie Alvarez didn't exist at Harvard. There was no file with her name, no ID badge, no assigned seat, no student number, no schedule. And yet, each night, after the last light flickered out in Widener's West Wing, she arrived, right on time. Nathan called her my quietest student. She called him Professor, after he gently told her not to call him Sir. Call me Nathan or Professor if that's easier, he had said. Professor feels safe, she'd whispered. And so it remained. Their routine deepened. Nathan would arrive early, erase the board, and leave one new shape, problem, or question. Not overwhelming, just enough to stir curiosity. When Sophie arrived, oversized coat trailing, notebook clutched close, she'd go straight to the board. No words, no small talk, just thinking. Sometimes she solved what he left. Sometimes she didn't. But always, she tried. And to Nathan, Cole, that raw, unpolished, hungry effort meant more than any classroom full of grade-chasing eyes. By the end of week 2, Sophie could explain the basics of linear transformations. By the end of week 3, she could visualize matrix shifts in 2 dimensions. By week 4, she was asking questions Nathan hadn't prepared answers for. One night, as she scribbled furiously mid-equation, she paused and looked up. Professor, she asked softly, why does symmetry feel safe? He blinked, taken off guard, then answered slowly, because it tells us something won't change unexpectedly. Sophie tilted her head. And why do numbers hum? Nathan chuckled. Hum? She nodded. It's like they're waiting. Like when they're not solved yet, they buzz. Nathan sat back, smiling. I haven't felt that kind of wonder in decades. But secrets, of course, don't stay secret forever. And one Thursday night, the balance shifted. Sophie was midway through exploring a rotation matrix problem when she heard it. Footsteps. Fast. Sharp. Not Nathan's. She froze. A man in a security vest entered the library. "This area is closed," he started, then stopped. His eyes flicked from the child to the professor to the board. "She's with me," Nathan said calmly, stepping forward. "With you?" "She's a kid, sir." "She's my student," Nathan replied. The words lingered. The guard blinked. "Uh-huh. Well, does the school know that?" "She's not officially registered, but she's not trespassing. She's my guest. I'll handle it with the dean in the morning." The guard hesitated, uncertain, but Nathan's voice carried quiet authority. "All right," he muttered. "Just keep the lights low, and make sure she gets out safe." He left. The door shut. Sophie stood trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble." Nathan crouched to meet her gaze. "You didn't." "But I'm not supposed to be here." "You're supposed to be wherever your mind can grow," he said softly. "And if Harvard can't see that, that's Harvard's problem." She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. She stayed, and they continued the lesson. The next morning, true to his word, Nathan went to see Dean Anderson. He didn't lie. He didn't downplay. "I've been mentoring a young girl in the math wing after hours," he said. "She's not enrolled, but she's gifted. And I think Harvard would be foolish not to find a way to make space for her." The dean raised an eyebrow. "A child prodigy? What kind of background are we talking?" "Working class," Nathan replied. "Daughter of a cleaning staff member?" The dean leaned back. "That complicates things." "Only if we let it." There was a long silence. Then Dean Anderson said, "Keep it quiet for now. No promises, no public statements, but don't stop. I want to see where this goes." Back in the library that night, Nathan handed Sophie a fresh sheet of paper. No problem on it, just one line. "If Harvard asked who you are, what would you write?" Sophie stared at the page for a long time. Then she picked up her pencil and wrote, "I'm the one who stayed, after everyone left." Week after week, Sophie Alvarez kept coming back. Even when her worn-out shoes had holes in the soles, even when her small body was exhausted from carrying laundry loads all afternoon, even when her eyelids fluttered with fatigue as the city slept. She came, not for praise, not for grades, just to learn. One night, Professor Nathan Cole arrived early with a quiet surprise. Beside him stood a slender girl with curious eyes and an easy smile. "Sophie," he said softly, "this is my daughter Claire. She's 12, homeschooled, brilliant, and eager to meet you." Sophie blushed, unsure of what to say. Claire stepped forward, kind eyes twinkling. "Hi," she said. "I heard you know more about pattern theory than most grad students." Sophie's cheeks reddened deeper. Claire grinned. "Want to show me how you did that folding trick? The one with the spiral?" Sophie nodded shyly, and just like that, without permission, without ceremony, she had her first classmate. The two girls became quiet friends. Claire never asked why Sophie's backpack was always stuffed with food. Sophie never asked how Claire knew so many languages. They simply worked. Two very different lives. One shared board. One night, as Sophie traced gentle spirals on the chalkboard, she turned to Nathan. "Do you think I'll ever go to a real school again?" "You already are," he smiled. "You're in one right now." "I mean, with other kids. Desks, teachers, a test with my name on it." Nathan grew quiet, thoughtful. "If that's what you want, I'll make sure it happens." Later that week, after a long afternoon of grading papers, Nathan stayed late in his office. On his desk, he drafted a petition. It wasn't formal, not yet, But it was a proposal for something new. The Independent Youth Scholar Initiative. An after-hours learning path for students with no documentation, no background, no access, but with clear evidence of extraordinary potential. He knew it wouldn't be approved easily, but it didn't matter, because Sophie had already proven something bigger than policy. The mind is not measured by enrollment. It is measured by persistence. By the end of the month, Nathan submitted Sophie's handwritten proof on constrained fold patterns to a respected mathematics journal. He signed it under the pseudonym SAL, Sophie Alvarez Learning. 5 days later, an editor wrote back, "Whoever this is," the note read, "has seen the world through a lens I've never considered. We would like to publish it." Nathan smiled as he read the email aloud. Sophie blinked, wide-eyed. "You mean someone liked it?" Nathan knelt beside her. "Sophie," he whispered, "they didn't just like it. They want the world to see what you see." She didn't smile. Not yet. Can I show my mom?" "Of course." That night, something cracked open in her world. Not loud, not explosive, but quietly, like the sound of a chalkboard being wiped clean, ready for something new. And then, it happened by accident. One evening, as Sophie helped Nathan tidy a stack of papers in the library, something fluttered loose from between the folders. She caught it before it hit the floor. A half-crumpled flyer. Harvard Youth Scholar Placement Exam, Spring Term Eligibility, ages 13 to 17. Room 402, March 10th, invitation only. Sophie stared at it for a long time. The words weren't meant for her. Not officially, not legally, but something in her chest tugged hard. When Nathan returned, he found her standing frozen, flyer in hand, eyes wide. "Professor, is this real?" He paused. "Yes, it's a pilot program. They're testing younger placements." She swallowed hard. Could I try?" Nathan blinked. He hadn't meant for her to see it. Wasn't sure she was ready, not academically, but emotionally. There would be others in the room, real students, real pressure, and rules. So many rules. He knelt down. "You want to take a test designed for teenagers in a program that doesn't even know you exist?" She nodded, slowly. "I just want to know if I can do it. Like, really do it." Nathan studied her face. There was no fear in her eyes, only hunger. He exhaled. "Then we'll make it happen." The next nights were different. No gentle spirals, no casual exploration. Nathan became her coach. "You won't have a perfect room," he warned her, "but your mind is sharper than the room." He taught her how to pace, how to breathe, how to face questions without panicking. He dimmed the lights. He made her write with dull pencils. He set timers. He dropped pens on purpose, creating distractions. "Focus through the noise," he said. Sophie worked harder than ever. Each night she brought new pages, filled with logic chains, folding diagrams, and number patterns written in her tiny, slanted hand. At one point, Nathan noticed she'd stopped drinking cocoa. "Thirsty?" he asked. She shook her head. "I think better when I'm thirsty." He didn't argue. 3 days before the exam, Nathan scheduled a meeting with Dr. Julia Spencer, the program coordinator. No relation to Sophie. He brought a folder of Sophie's work, her proof, her process logs, a short essay she had written titled, "What Numbers Know That People Forget." Dr. Spencer read in silence, then looked up. "This was written by an 8-year-old?" Nathan nodded. "Uncoached, just witnessed." She leaned back, skeptical, but not cruel. There's no precedent for this. I know. And if the board finds out, I know that too. Dr. Spencer tapped the folder. But if she's who you say she is, she doesn't need us to open the door. Nathan leaned forward. She just needs not to be locked out of it. A long pause. Then softly, Dr. Spencer replied, If she passes the exam, she qualifies. I won't stop her. No special treatment, she added. Nathan smiled. She doesn't need special. She just needs fair. And so, on the cold morning of March 10th, Sophie Alvarez prepared. Her mother, Isabel, wrapped her in her warmest coat, made her a peanut butter sandwich in tin foil. As she kissed her daughter's forehead, her voice trembled. You don't have to go, mijija, she whispered. If it's too much... Sophie looked up, eyes steady. Mama, I don't want to be invisible forever. Pierce Hall was ancient. Its stone floors echoed like they held secrets. Its arched ceilings seemed to lean close, whispering stories of scholars long gone. And now, an 8-year-old girl stood before its great wooden doors, her backpack digging into her small shoulder, hands trembling. Through the glass, she could already hear the voices inside, teenagers laughing. One complaining about the coffee, another showing off a new calculator. Sophie had no calculator, just a pencil, 2 erasers, and the smallest notebook anyone had ever carried into a Harvard math exam. Beside her stood Professor Nathan Cole, calm as ever. You ready? He asked softly. No, Sophie said honestly. Nathan smiled. Perfect. That means your brain's awake. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her something small. Sophie blinked. It was her mother's old library card. Edges frayed, long expired. It's 5 years out of date, she whispered. I know, Nathan smiled, but it proves you've been studying longer than anyone in there. She grinned, clutched it tight, and pushed the heavy door open. The room went quiet. A few heads turned. One boy in the back snickered under his breath. Is she lost? Sophie ignored them. She found the only empty desk, front row, center, and sat down. At the front of the room, 3 professors sat behind a long table. Among them was Dr. Julia Spencer. She met Sophie's gaze with a slow, steady nod. You may begin, she said. The test had 10 sections. The first 2 were basic pattern logic and spatial awareness. Sophie flew through them, pencil dancing across the paper. Section 3 was harder. Real algebraic applications. She slowed down, breathing deep, her small fingers moving with purpose. By question 23, she forgot the others were there. By question 40, she forgot she was afraid. But then came section 7. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't equations. It was a written prompt. In a system where rules don't recognize you, how do you prove you belong? Sophie's hand froze. Her chest tightened. What kind of question was this? For a long moment, her pencil hovered in mid-air. Then, slowly, her mind began to quiet. She started to write. I don't prove it by asking for space. I prove it by taking what no one sees and turning it into something they can't ignore. She paused, breath shaking, then added, I belong because I stayed. Because I solved what others left behind. Because I kept showing up when no one waited for me. She didn't know if it was the answer they wanted, but it was hers, and that mattered more. 3 hours passed. When the final bell rang, Sophie stood slowly. Her knees were stiff, her eyes dry. As she handed in her papers, one professor leaned in, muttering, Your handwriting's a mess. Before Sophie could lower her gaze, Dr. Spencer cut in sharply. But the thinking is clear. Sophie looked down, then looked up. "Thank you," she whispered, and she left. Outside, Nathan was waiting on the steps. He stood as she approached, eyes searching hers. Sophie didn't smile, didn't cry. She simply said, "I didn't freeze." And for him, that was enough. That night, back in the library, Sophie sat beneath the old chalkboard. The wall in front of her was blank, yet her heart felt full. "I think I did okay," she whispered. Nathan nodded. "You didn't just take a test, Sophie. You broke a rule, simply by existing in that room." She tilted her head. "Is that bad?" He smiled. "It's the beginning of something bigger than rules." Then he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a simple card. On the front, "To the bravest student I've ever had." On the back, "No matter the score, you've already passed." The envelope didn't look special. Plain white, a little wrinkled. It ended up tucked between a grocery flyer and an overdue electricity bill at home. Isabel almost missed it. She was sorting the mail after a long morning shift, tired eyes half open, hands still scented faintly of bleach and lemon. Then she saw it, the red Harvard seal. Her heart dropped. A warning? A mistake? Had someone found out? Had Nathan been fired? Hands trembling, she opened it. She read the first line, then the second. By the third, she sank slowly onto the edge of their old sofa, letter clutched to her chest. "Sophie," she called softly. The girl sat by the window, notebook open, pencil in hand. "Come here, mijija." Sophie looked up, sensing something in her mother's voice. She walked over, knees brushing against the worn carpet. Her mother held the letter toward her, eyes glassy. Sophie took it, hands shaking. "Dear Miss Alvarez," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have earned the highest score in the spring placement exam and have been accepted into the Harvard Youth Scholar Program for Mathematics. Classes begin April 10th. Full scholarship awarded." There was more. A list of instructions, a student ID number, a temporary passcode for campus access. But Sophie stopped reading after one sentence. "You have been accepted." She looked up. "Mama," she whispered. Isabel couldn't speak. She simply pulled her daughter close and held her tighter than she ever had. And in that tiny apartment above the laundromat, surrounded by peeling paint and unpaid bills, something holy bloomed. Later that day, Nathan received a copy of the results. He read the email in his office, then leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and smiled. She hadn't just passed. She had outscored every other candidate. 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, private school kids, competition winners. Sophie Alvarez, age 8, had outperformed them all. Nathan chuckled softly. Then he stood, opened a small wooden box on his desk. Inside was an old piece of chalk, cracked at one end. It was the very piece he had used in his first lecture at Harvard years ago, before tenure, before recognition, before Sophie. He placed it in a small envelope and wrote one word on the outside: "Yours." Then he walked quietly down to the library, because she deserved to receive it, in the only classroom that had ever mattered. That night, Sophie returned to the board. It wasn't a lesson night. No Coco, no Claire, no equations, just her and the wall. She stood for a long time, heart full. Then, with a fresh marker, she wrote at the top of the board, "April 10th, my first day," and beneath it, She drew a small spiral, her favorite, always moving, always growing. April 10th. The sun rose pale over Cambridge, brushing the rooftops of Harvard with soft gold. In a small apartment above the laundromat, Sophie Alvarez stood in front of a cracked mirror. Her soft blue sweater felt warm and strange against her skin. Her black pants hung neatly, no longer frayed at the edges, and on her feet, new shoes. The first pair she had ever worn that didn't flap when she walked. Behind her, Isabel watched quietly. "You look like you belong there," she whispered. Sophie smiled softly. "No, Mama," she said. "I look like I always belonged. I just finally match." Outside, Professor Nathan Cole waited in his car. When Sophie climbed in, he glanced at her and nodded. "You ready, Alvarez?" She grinned. "As I'll ever be." Pierce Hall looked different in the daylight, less mysterious, more alive. Sophie walked through the sunlit corridors. Her new backpack bounced lightly against her back. No one stared. Most students were too busy finding their lockers, their schedules, their confidence. But near the staircase, a red-haired girl, maybe 12, paused. She looked Sophie up and down. "Third floor is the younger group," the girl said casually. Sophie blinked, then smiled politely. "I'm going to room 210. The girl laughed. "That's where the math placement kids are." "I know," Sophie replied, and walked on. Room 210 smelled like whiteboard ink and possibility. 12 students were already seated, mostly teenagers hunched over phones or leafing through heavy books. The only empty seat sat front row, center. Sophie walked to it without hesitation and sat down. Moments later, the door opened. A tall woman with glasses and a stack of notebooks entered. Her voice, when she spoke, was warm, like honey. "Welcome to Foundations of Mathematical Thinking," she said. Her gaze swept the room. When her eyes landed on Sophie, she paused, then smiled. And that smile, gentle, knowing, stayed with Sophie through the entire lesson. The material wasn't hard. It was thrilling. Functions, fractals, proofs, the building blocks of thought. Sophie scribbled eagerly in her notebook. She wasn't faster than everyone else, but she was different. She asked why when others didn't. She challenged phrasing. She reframed graphs. She thought sideways. At the end of class, as the other students packed up, the instructor approached her. "You're Sophie Alvarez?" "Yes, ma'am." "I've read about you." Sophie froze. "I hope it was good." The instructor smiled. It was honest, brave, brilliant. Sophie looked down, then up. "Thank you." That evening, Sophie returned to the library, not to study, just to sit. She pulled out the chalk Nathan had given her. In the corner of the board, she wrote, "I used to sit here afraid to be seen." Underneath it, "Now I write here so no one else has to hide." 3 days later, someone else came. A boy, maybe 10, shy, quiet. He peeked around the shelves. "Are you the girl from the letter?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded. "Can I learn here too?" She smiled. "Sit down. I'll show you where to start." And just like that, the classroom began to grow, one quiet learner at a time. Within 2 weeks, Sophie Alvarez was already a name whispered through Harvard's halls. Some called her the little one. Others called her the janitor's kid who cracked the placement exam. Most didn't understand how she had gotten in. A few didn't care. But every single student knew one thing. She wasn't ordinary. Sophie didn't act like she had something to prove. She acted like she had something to build. She showed up early, stayed late, asked questions no one else thought to ask, and when she spoke in class, the room quieted, not from volume, but from gravity. Her words felt like discoveries. One Friday afternoon, the instructor made an announcement. "Next week," she said, "you will all attempt the Ramsey Variant Challenge." A few students groaned. A few perked up. Sophie blinked. She had never heard of it. "The challenge," the instructor explained, "has existed for 16 years. It is not mandatory, but anyone who completes it correctly earns an automatic letter of recommendation from the department." Now the room was listening. One boy in the back leaned forward. Another snapped his pen in excitement. Sophie raised her hand. "What's the question?" she asked. The instructor turned to the whiteboard and wrote a line of symbols. It looked like a spider web of logic. At the center, a graph theory structure. Dense, recursive, conditional. "This," the instructor said, "is a variant of the Ramsey problem. Most have tried to brute force it. Some used AI. None succeeded. The beauty lies in the limitation. It requires human insight." Sophie stared at it. The lines and symbols swam gently across her vision. There was something familiar about the way the constraints bent. Not in content, in rhythm. Like something she had once seen on the library boards years ago. Drawn, erased, forgotten. But she remembered. That night, Sophie sat by her window. Notebook open, knees tucked to her chest. She didn't start with equations. She started with circles, then arrows, then folds. She imagined the problem not as numbers, but as movements. People at a party who couldn't sit next to certain others. Patterns trying to hide, but accidentally revealing themselves. The next morning, she brought her sketch to Nathan. He examined the loops and crossings. "You're folding the graph," he said, surprised. "You're treating it like paper." Sophie nodded. "Because graphs are flat, but decisions aren't. What if it's not about avoiding collision, but minimizing the sound of it?" Nathan stared, then handed the notebook back, voice soft. "Keep going." By Monday, most students had given up. They tried algorithms, randomization, brute force. Sophie said nothing. She just kept working. By Tuesday night, 6 full pages. By Wednesday, 23. But it wasn't until Thursday at 2:11 a.m., alone in the library once again, that something clicked. She had been looking at the graph from one direction, always left to right. What if it was meant to be read backwards, like mirrored choices? She flipped her notebook upside down, and suddenly, the tangled mess resolved into a pattern, a perfect balance of constraint and flexibility, a recursive solution that wasn't force, it was grace. She didn't cheer, didn't scream. She just sat back, hands shaking, and whispered, "I found you." The next morning, Sophie walked into class with 23 pages of carefully sketched logic. She didn't expect fanfare, didn't expect praise. She simply handed the folder to her instructor, then sat down. The day unfolded like any other. Equations, proofs, discussion. But when class ended, the instructor looked up and said softly, "Sophie, would you stay a moment?" The room emptied. Teenagers filing out, backpacks slung over their shoulders. Sophie waited, heart racing. When the last door clicked shut, the instructor leaned forward. Her voice was low, gentle. "Did anyone help you with this?" Sophie blinked. "No." "You didn't copy?" "No." "You didn't guess?" Sophie shook her head. Saw it in the folds. The instructor stared down at the proof again, then back at Sophie. I've taught for 19 years, she said slowly. I've seen every kind of genius. Loud, proud, fragile, furious. She held up Sophie's work. But I've never seen this kind. She smiled. Quiet, precise, patient. Sophie said nothing. The praise didn't fill her with pride, only with a deeper, calmer determination. The next day, Dean Holloway requested a meeting. Sophie sat in his grand office, her small legs dangling above the floor. He cleared his throat. Well, young lady, I suppose congratulations are in order? Sophie nodded politely. Dean Holloway tapped the proof on his desk. This is unsettling. Sophie blinked. I mean that in a good way, he added quickly. It unsettles the idea that age defines capacity. He leaned forward. I would like to invite you to present this proof at our annual spring symposium next month. Sophie's heart stopped. A presentation? Yes, 15 minutes. You'll be the youngest speaker in program history. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to speak in front of people. Dean Holloway smiled gently. Then it's time to learn. The following weeks were a blur. Claire helped her prepare slides. Nathan coached her on pacing, pauses, and posture. Her mother bought her a deep gray dress with simple buttons and shoes that didn't squeak. You don't have to be loud, Nathan reminded her. Just be clear. But what if I mess up? Then you'll show them what real courage looks like. The day of the symposium arrived. The lecture hall was vast. Rows of professors, students, researchers. A sea of faces, a hum of expectation. Sophie stood behind the podium, fingers wrapped tightly around a small stone Claire had given her for luck. The lights dimmed. The room hushed. Sophie looked out at the eyes watching her. For a moment, fear rose sharp and cold. Then she remembered. The library. The empty room. The chalkboard. The silence that had always listened. She began to speak, softly, slowly, but with clarity. She told them how she approached the graph. Not by breaking it down, but by listening to its rhythm. She showed the folds, the turns, the inversion that unlocked the recursive solution. When she finished, there was silence. Then, a hand raised, a senior researcher from MIT. Why did you see it differently? He asked. Sophie thought for a long moment, then answered softly, because I never learned how to see it the normal way. The room stayed silent. Then, applause. Not loud, not forced, full, warm, real. That night, Sophie returned to the library. Not to study, just to sit. She took out her chalk and wrote one small question on the board. What do we miss when we only listen to the loudest voices? Then she packed her bag and walked into the night. Not as the girl who solved the problem, but as the girl who taught them to ask better ones. It began with a single chair. Sophie found it one evening by the dumpster behind the east wing. One leg wobbled, the seat was cracked, but it still stood, still held weight. She dragged it, inch by inch, past the laundry room, down a narrow hallway where no one walked unless they were paid to clean it, and left it outside room B17. A forgotten supply closet, flickering light, no key, no rules. The next morning, Professor Nathan Cole found the chair. He smiled. Because he understood. Sophie was building something, not a perfect classroom, but a real one. She started leaving notes. scraps of paper tucked into old books, folded formulas behind dusty shelves, tiny questions written in pencil on the backs of flyers. Some said, "Come after hours. I'll show you what I know. If school never made space for you, this room will." You don't need a name tag to ask a question. The first to respond was Jamal. 15, a dishwasher in the dining hall. He hadn't finished middle school, but could multiply 8-digit numbers in his head faster than a calculator. Then came May, daughter of a nursing student, 11 years old. "I only feel smart when I'm alone," she whispered. Then Danny. Then Marisol. Then 2 more. And suddenly, the room had people. Different stories. Different hurts. Different dreams. But one shared thing. They didn't belong anywhere else. So Sophie gave them somewhere to belong. She brought blankets from home. Claire donated a secondhand whiteboard. Nathan supplied notebooks, pencils, old copies of The Art of Mathematics and Proofs Without Words. Every Thursday night, after the world above had gone to sleep, the room lit up. No grades, no speeches. Just quiet learning, one question at a time. Sophie didn't stand in front. She sat with them, knee to knee, marker in hand. She asked first, before explaining. She didn't tell them they were smart. She told them they were seen, and they believed her, because she had once been the one sitting alone, too. Nathan called it the echo room, because what started as a whisper had grown into something bigger. Word spread, quietly, carefully. A janitor's kid teaching math in a storage room, a place where you didn't need ID to understand. A door that never asked where you came from, only what you were ready to try. One night, Dean Holloway called Nathan into his office. "I've been hearing things," he said, "about your students' sessions." Nathan didn't deny it. "They're not hurting anyone," he said simply. "No," Holloway admitted. "In fact, I think they're doing more good than half our curriculum." Nathan waited. "But it's unofficial, and unofficial things scare institutions." Nathan leaned forward. "You once told me Sophie unsettled you. In a good way." "Yes. She's building something even more unsettling now. A space that doesn't ask permission." Holloway rubbed his temples. "And what would you have me do? Endorse it?" "No," Nathan said. "Just don't shut it down." The dean didn't respond, but he didn't shut it down, and that was enough. That Thursday, Sophie walked into room B17 and found something new. The flickering light was gone, replaced by a soft, steady bulb. And on the wall, someone had left a small plaque. It read, "The room she rebuilt. Est." Sophie touched the metal gently. It was warm, like it had waited to be seen for a very long time. That night, the room was fuller than ever. 9 students, a mix of kids, staff members, siblings of scholars, even 2 graduate students who had heard the rumors and came just to watch. But they didn't just watch. They stayed. They asked. They learned. When the session ended, one of them said quietly, "I've never felt this smart in a real classroom." Sophie smiled. "That's because most classrooms were built to make you feel small." Claire showed up the following week with a folded piece of paper. "It's from Dr. Spencer," she said. "She came to observe." Sophie unfolded the note. "When I walked into your room, I didn't feel like I was in a class. I felt like I was in a revolution." Underneath, a line, "Let me know how I can help." Sophie stared at it for a long time, then added it to the wall, next to every student's first proof, their first diagram, their first question written out loud. A timeline of belonging. Nathan began arriving early. He didn't teach. He just sat in the back and listened. Sometimes he took notes. Not about math, but about how people unfolded when they weren't being measured. He watched how Sophie used silence as a tool, how she never rushed an answer, how she celebrated wrong steps as necessary parts of the journey. One night, as they walked out together, Nathan said quietly, "You're not teaching them how to be brilliant." Sophie looked up. "No?" He smiled. "You're showing them they already are." Eventually, Harvard had to take notice. Not because Sophie asked for it, not because she sought the spotlight, but because the students she taught began outperforming their peers. They showed up to regular classes with a new confidence. They started challenging problems that were once off limits. Professors began to ask, "Where did you learn this?" And the answer was always the same, from someone who wasn't supposed to be the teacher. Dean Holloway called Sophie in again. This time, she wasn't nervous. He handed her a folder. Inside was a proposal. The Morales Initiative, a pilot program offering after-hours support and instruction, led by peer mentors, open to all ages and backgrounds, no questions asked. Sophie looked up. "You're naming it after me?" He shrugged. It felt overdue. She smiled. Then her voice grew serious. "But if we make it official, it has to stay real." He nodded. "Then you'll help design it." And she did. The Morales Initiative launched the following term. Room B17 was no longer enough. The group moved upstairs to a real classroom, windows, matching chairs, whiteboards on both sides, but they kept one thing the same, the rule that no one had to raise their hand to belong. The first time Sophie walked into that new room, someone had already written something on the board. It said, "This is what happens when someone stays long enough to change the story." She stood quietly in the doorway, read the sentence 3 times, then picked up her chalk. Underneath it, she wrote, "Now stay with me, because I'm not done." It started with a phone left recording. One Thursday evening, after a long day of classes, Claire asked, "Can I film your session? Not for the internet, not for views, just to remember." Sophie hesitated. "I don't want them to think I'm showing off." Claire shook her head. "Then don't show off, just teach. I'll hold the camera still. No filters, no edits. Just you." Sophie agreed. That night, the room was full. Jamal was working on a spatial logic riddle. May was untangling a recursive sequence. Sophie floated between them, like she always did. Gently, quietly, not telling, but guiding. At one point, she stood at the board and said something she hadn't written down. Math isn't about finding answers. It's about listening long enough until the question tells you how it wants to be solved. Claire caught that line on video. 9 seconds long. She clipped it, posted it on a private feed, then thought nothing of it, until it was shared once, then 20 times, then thousands. Within 3 days, the video had over 2 million views. Within 5, major education accounts were reposting it with captions like, "Wisdom from an 8-year-old who never had a classroom." "Meet the janitor's daughter, rewriting the rules of learning." By the end of the week, her name was trending, Sophie Alvarez. The girl with a marker and a mission. Reporters showed up first, then podcasters, then 2 producers from a national morning show. Everyone wanted to ask the same questions. How did you learn this? What made you different? Do you know how rare your mind is? Sophie never had good answers for them, so she told the truth. "I wasn't trying to be different. I was just trying not to disappear. Harvard released a statement. It was brief, careful, proud. The university is honored to support the growth and voice of young scholars like Sophie Alvarez. Her story reminds us why education should always be listening. Dean Holloway called her in again. "You're about to be seen by a lot of people," he said. "Are you okay with that?" Sophie shrugged. "As long as they see the others, too." He tilted his head. "Others?" "Everyone in that room. Everyone who never got invited in. I'm not the only whisper. I was just the first one loud enough to get through." The Morales Initiative doubled in size, then tripled. Professors offered to volunteer. Retired alumni sent in books. A tech company donated tablets and portable boards. Even the janitorial staff pitched in, bringing blankets, folding chairs, snacks. Room 213 became a hub, not just for learning, but for belonging. Students came who didn't know how to speak up. Parents came who thought they were too late to start over. One woman, 39 years old, stood in the back one night, tears in her eyes. "I dropped out when I was 15, she whispered. "I didn't think I could ever catch up." Sophie walked over, handed her a pencil. "We don't catch up," she said. "We start from wherever we are." Then came the invitation. A handwritten letter delivered by courier from Geneva. "We invite Miss Sophie Alvarez to speak at the International Forum on Youth and Innovation. All travel expenses paid. Presentation time, 20 minutes. Sophie stared at the envelope. "I don't even have a suitcase," she whispered. Claire laughed. "We'll figure that part out." Nathan was quiet when he read the letter. He looked at Sophie. "You don't have to say yes." "But if I do," she asked softly, "what do I talk about?" He smiled. "You talk about chalk and silence and the night you didn't run when I found you." The forum was held in a hall made of glass and steel. Hundreds of people, lights, cameras, voices in translation. Sophie stood backstage. A navy dress. Her first ever pair of real shoes. Her hands trembled. Claire squeezed her shoulder. Nathan nodded from the front row. When they called her name, Sophie walked out to the podium. She didn't use a slideshow. She didn't read from a script. She just looked at them all and said, "I was 8 years old when I first stood in front of a board no one expected me to touch." The room fell silent. She told them about the mop bucket, the chalk that wasn't hers. The moment the question on the wall felt like it was waiting for her. She spoke about the echo room, the students, the nights of whispered formulas and uncertain hope. And then she said, "Brilliance doesn't need permission. It needs a crack in the door and someone who won't walk away." When she finished, there was silence. Then a slow, rising applause. Soft, steady, real. That night, back in her hotel room, Sophie sat by the window, watched the city lights flicker. Nathan walked in quietly. "You okay?" "I'm tired," she whispered, "but in the good kind of way." He nodded. "You just changed something." She looked at him. "Not alone." Over the next month, donations poured in. Not just money, time, stories, letters from kids who saw her speak and wrote, "I didn't think someone like me could ever matter in a place like that." Sophie wrote back to every single one, some by hand, some by email, all with the same final line, "You matter already. Now let's build something together." A senator visited the program. She offered funding, national expansion, a press tour. Sophie smiled, politely, then said, "We don't need cameras, we need chairs." The senator laughed and doubled the grant. At Harvard, Sophie returned to her classroom. Room 213 now had a second name, unofficial, but written in gold marker above the door, the first whisper. She never claimed credit, but she never denied what had happened either, because she knew now, whispers can travel farther than shouts, especially when they come from the ones the world tried hardest not to hear. And then came another envelope, gold-trimmed, the kind that didn't knock, it announced, delivered by hand, signed in ink, stamped with the seal of the Hawthorne Institute of Theoretical Mathematics. Sophie turned it over in her palms 3 times before opening. Inside, a letter, thick paper, embossed text, and at the bottom, 5 words in bold: full scholarship, residential placement, immediate admission. The Hawthorne Fellowship, a path paved in marble, mentorship by Nobel laureates, private labs, infinite funding, and one quiet condition tucked in paragraph 3. Participation requires exclusive commitment. Fellows must relocate. All external affiliations, including personal education initiatives, must be paused for the program's duration. Sophie folded the letter, set it on her desk, and stared at it, like it might burst into flames. Nathan read the letter that evening. He didn't speak right away. Then he leaned back and asked, "Do you want it?" Sophie didn't answer. "I mean," he said softly, "do you want the math, the solitude, the pure immersion, or just the name?" She stared at her shoes. "It's everything I used to dream about." She hesitated. "But it would cost something." Nathan nodded. Real things usually do. That night, Sophie returned to room 213. The board was still smudged with proofs from the last session. Marisol had finally cracked a probability series she'd wrestled with for weeks. Jamal had taught a younger student how to fold time graphs into stair-step patterns. The room buzzed with a kind of hope that didn't make headlines. And Sophie knew this room would not follow her to Hawthorne. She thought of her mother, how Rosa had once said, "Not all doors are opened with keys. Some are opened with your hands bleeding." She thought of May, of Claire, of that first cracked chair outside room B17. She thought of the chalk in her pocket, the one Nathan had given her. And finally, she thought of herself. Not the prodigy, not the speaker, not the whisper. Just Sophie. The girl who had once written answers on forgotten boards at 2 a.m., with no one watching and no one waiting. She picked up a marker, wrote 3 simple words on the board. What matters more? The next morning, Sophie walked into Dean Holloway's office, the letter in her hand. He looked up. "You've made a decision?" "I have." He leaned forward, fingers steepled. Sophie laid the letter on his desk. "I'm turning it down." His eyebrows rose. "You understand what that means?" "I do." "No cameras, no second chances. That kind of door doesn't open twice." She nodded. "I'm not closing a door," she said. "I'm choosing one." He looked at her, studying her face, then leaned back. "Well," he said slowly, "I suppose we all learn from someone." She smiled. "I learned from everyone who wasn't allowed to choose before." That evening she wrote her official response. It wasn't long. "Thank you for your generous offer. At this time, I must decline. My work is here." She signed it simply, S. Alvarez, then sealed it, and breathed. Word spread, of course. Some called her foolish, some called her brave. Most didn't understand. But none of that mattered, because the people who did understand were sitting cross-legged in room 213. passing pencils and hope between them like currency. 2 days later, Sophie found a different letter. This one was handwritten. No seal, just folded paper, slipped under the library door. I heard you said no to the biggest yes of your life. I don't know if I would have had the guts. But because you did, I'm going to say yes to something I've been scared of for years. Thank you. Sophie kept that letter in her notebook, between her first proof and the chalk stub Nathan had given her. Because not all power is loud. Some of it is soft and steady and unshakable. In the weeks that followed, she doubled down on the Morales initiative. She launched a new track, Second Starters, classes for adults who never finished school. The first to sign up was a 61-year-old cafeteria worker named Mrs. Elaine. I used to be good at math, she whispered. You still are, Sophie replied. And Elaine cried as she solved her first equation in 20 years. Claire began organizing weekend labs. May taught her first session to a group of new 10-year-olds. Nathan started writing a book. Not about Sophie, but about the movement she'd sparked. He titled it, The Equation Wasn't the Point. Sophie kept receiving letters from universities, foundations, media outlets. She responded to each with the same template. Thank you, my classroom is open. You're welcome to visit, but I'm staying where the learning started. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled outside the library windows, Sophie stood alone in room 213. She looked around. The mismatched chairs, the cracked whiteboard, the quote wall, the names of every student, written in chalk. She whispered, I said no, so this could keep saying yes. It wasn't on the syllabus. There were no invitations, no emails, no dean's approval. But by 7:03 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night, room 213 was standing room only. Not because of a famous guest, not because of free food, but because Sophie Alvarez had agreed, after months of saying no, to give her first official lecture. She called it, What the Board Didn't Teach Me. It had started as a joke. One night during a late review session, Jamal had teased her. Come on, he said. You know you're already a better teacher than most of the ones with titles. Sophie had laughed. I'm just a student. Exactly, he said. And somehow, you make me believe I can be one too. That stuck. So when Claire handed her a piece of chalk later that week and said, You ready to step forward? Sophie didn't say no. She just took a breath and nodded. Nathan was the first to arrive. He brought coffee and silence. He sat in the far left corner, hands folded, eyes steady. Then came May, then Marisol, then Elaine from the second starters class, then a trickle of professors, then the dean himself. By the time the room filled, even the hallway had students leaning against the walls, notebooks open on their knees. No one said a word until Sophie entered. She wore a plain gray sweater, black pants, her old shoes, now stitched neatly at the sides. She carried no laptop, no flash drive, just her notebook and the stub of chalk Nathan had given her years ago. She stepped up to the board, looked at the crowd, and whispered, I've been in this room longer than you think. The class leaned in. I've mopped its corners, dusted its shelves, solved its problems, when no one watched. And for a long time, I thought that meant I didn't belong up here. She paused. But I've learned something. She turned and wrote a single question on the board. What changes when we're seen? Then she began. She didn't start with formulas. She started with a story. The first night she touched the board. The night Professor Nathan Cole didn't call security, but called her a student. She told them about the hidden notebooks, the echo room. The night Marisol solved a problem with her fingers shaking, but her voice steady. She drew a simple diagram, a circle, then a spiral, then a scatter plot. Most classrooms are designed like this, she said, pointing to the circle. Everyone faces the center. The teacher speaks. The rest receive. She pointed to the scatter plot. But this is how we really learn. Messy, personal, unexpected, and sometimes backwards. Laughter. But the kind that comes from recognition. A hand raised. One of the professors. Sophie, when did you first feel like you were a teacher? She smiled. The day I stopped thinking answers were the most important thing. Another voice. Dr. Spencer. And what matters more than answers? Courage, Sophie said. To be wrong out loud. To ask. Even when your voice shakes. To keep showing up. Even when you think you don't deserve the seat. She continued for 30 minutes. No slides. No quotes from textbooks. Just truth. Real truth. And when she finally stepped back from the board, the room was completely still. Until Nathan stood and began clapping. One by one, the room joined in. Not loud, but layered, like gratitude that had waited too long for a voice. Afterward, no one left right away. Students lingered. Some cried. One girl from the second row whispered, I used to hate math, but now it feels like it could be mine. Another said, I never thought someone like me could speak here. Sophie just smiled and hugged them both. Later that night, after the crowd had gone, Sophie stayed to clean the board. It was a habit she hadn't lost. As she wiped the chalk away, a soft voice said behind her, You know you don't have to clean it anymore. She turned. Dean Holloway stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. I know, she said, but I want to. He nodded, then said something that made her heart stop. You're no longer just part of the initiative. As of next term, we'd like to list you officially as an adjunct lecturer. Sophie blinked. I'm not old enough. You're more than old enough, he replied. You've just been doing the job unofficially this whole time. He stepped forward, handed her a printed contract. Nothing fancy. But at the bottom, in bold, Instructor S. Alvarez. She didn't speak. She just held the paper for a long time, then whispered, Does this mean I'm a teacher? Dean Holloway smiled. No, he said. It means now the world finally knows you are. That night, Sophie didn't go straight home. She returned to room B17, the old supply closet, the beginning. She opened the door, stepped inside, sat on the floor. It still smelled like old paper and hope. She took out her notebook, wrote a new sentence at the top of the page. I used to wonder if I'd ever belong in a classroom. Now I wonder how many classrooms I still need to build. She closed the book, looked up at the ceiling, and whispered one last thing to the empty room. Thank you for holding me when the world wouldn't. Years later, people would ask her when it started. Was it the night you picked up the chalk? The moment you rewrote an equation at 2 a.m.? The first time someone called you teacher? Sophie Alvarez never had a perfect answer, because the truth was simpler and harder. It started the first time someone saw her and didn't look away. The end.